Picture the Roman Empire at its height. It was massive, organized, and, believe it or not, surprisingly chill about religion. Seriously, Rome was a giant spiritual sponge. If you were a Roman citizen, the government didn't care if you worshipped a cat, a sacred rock, or a bearded guy in the clouds. As long as you paid your taxes and didn't start a riot, the state's official stance was basically, you do you. But then a new group showed up, the Christians, and suddenly the most tolerant empire on earth turned into a paranoid bully. The Romans, the same people who thought a fun Saturday involved lions eating criminals, decided that this specific group was a danger to civilization itself. But why? Was it the praying? The hymns? Not exactly. To the Romans, the early Christians weren't just a different religion. They were baby-eating, antisocial, treasonous atheists who were going to destroy the world. To understand the rage, you have to understand the Pax Deorum, or the peace of the gods. The Romans believed their empire stayed strong only because they kept the gods happy with constant sacrifices and giant festivals. Then the Christians show up and say, hey, those gods, they aren't real, and that incense you're burning, yeah, we're not doing that. To a Roman, this wasn't just disrespectful, it was a security threat. If the gods didn't get their smoke, they might send a plague, an earthquake, or, heaven forbid, make the wine taste bad. Because Christians refused to pray to the Roman gods, the Romans legally labeled them atheists. In the Roman mind, if a volcano erupted, it wasn't geology. It was because that guy in the toga over there didn't pray to Vulcan. Christians were seen as divine magnets for bad luck. They weren't just wrong, they were dangerous. Because they were often persecuted, Christians met in secret, usually in basements or at night. And when people meet in secret, the neighbours start talking. And the neighbours in Rome were wild. First, there was the cannibalism thing. Christians talked about a love feast where they gathered to eat the body and blood of Christ. The Romans, who weren't great at metaphors, took this literally. Rumours spread that Christians were kidnapping infants and baking them into bread. Second, because Christians called each other brother and sister, and then greeted one another with a holy kiss. The Roman gossip mill went into overdrive. They assumed these love feasts were actually massive, secret orgies. To the Romans, Christians were basement-dwelling weirdos with very questionable hobbies. But the biggest problem wasn't what they did in secret, it was what they didn't do in public. In Rome, the emperor wasn't just the president, he was a god. Once a year, you had to pinch some incense and say, Caesar is Lord. It was basically a first-century loyalty test. Christians refused. They believed that giving even a tiny pinch of incense to a human was a betrayal of their faith. To a Roman governor, this wasn't a religious preference. It was treason, plain and simple. When they said Jesus is Lord, it sounded like they were building a secret state within a state, loyal to a king who wasn't the emperor. If you won't worship the boss assumes you're planning a coup. Finally, Christians were just annoying. Roman social life revolved around temples. If you went to a wedding, a theatre show, or even a dinner party, there was a pagan sacrifice involved. Christians stayed home. They were the people who didn't come to the office party and didn't watch the Super Bowl of the Colosseum. The Romans called this odium humani generis, or hatred of the human race. They thought Christians hated life, fun, and the Roman way of being human. They were the ultimate social outcasts. So the Romans didn't hate Christians because they loved Jesus. They hated them because they thought Christians were unpatriotic, bad luck-bringing, cannibalistic killjoys who were going to ruin the empire. But despite the lions and the rumours, the movement kept growing. The ultimate irony? 300 years later, the emperor himself would become a Christian. Soon, the Romans would start persecuting people for not being Christian, but that's a story for another time. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and share to continue producing kind of video.